The main person is Charles Oakley. We call him the enforcer.
Oakley in his face and
floor by Oakley, and Barkley goes at Oakley. Oakley screaming in the face of Larry Johnson.
What makes a good enforcer? Is it hard fouls?
Nice lead from Larry. Oh, a hard foul given by Oakley.
Maybe protecting your teammates.
Now Oakley joins in.
Yes, indeed. There are punches thrown. Oakley was coming to the defense of Michael Jordan that time.
Charles is Michael's bodyguard.
Or is it just someone who doesn't back down?
The outside. Oh, fight. Oakley and Rivers. Oh, boy.
Whatever it is, Charles Oakley did all of it in his quest to intimidate everyone he played. But Charles Oakley wasn't just some goon. He had substance.
Oakley, a blue-collar player, often gets overlooked in an all-star situation.
Tenacious rebounds and putback buckets.
Oakley has 18 rebounds total, 13 as you said, Rick, offensively, and 20 points.
That's how Oakley gets paid.
Great defense.
I tell you what, every time Charles Oakley has been on Shaq, he's had some problems.
And a nice mid-range jumper.
Why Oakley's so valuable, he kills you on the boards and then he can hit that jump shot.
There were a lot of reasons why you wanted Oak on the court. For nearly 2 decades, he put his body on the line and set the tone from the opening tip.
The numbers won't blow you away, Clyde, but it's the intangibles that made Charles Oakley such a good player.
Charles Oakley is a brave man.
Charles is just a totally fearless competitor when it comes to using his body. It's amazing what he gives game in and game out.
There's no 90s New York Knicks without him.
But if they trade him, they got to trade me too. That's how important I think Charles is to this team and to me.
Every game was a war as he broke down his opponents both physically and mentally.
Charles Oakley wears that devilish look on his face like, I got you to lose your cool.
But that's why he was the oak tree. Strong, sturdy, and impossible to waver.
You know, now guys get touched kind of hard. They want to fight back, but hey, bring it on.
Let's jog your memory. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, Charles Oakley moved to York, Alabama at just 7 years old to live with his grandparents. It was in York where he developed his work ethic, giving credit to his grandfather for the man and player he would eventually become. When he returned to Cleveland 4 years later, he started to take basketball seriously. Yet basketball wasn't the sport that Charles Oakley was initially known for during his years at John Hay High School. Oakley was a star defensive end, even being recruited by football power Ohio State. But as Oakley would say, he cared more about basketball and also wanted to get out of Ohio and get away from any negative distractions. So the 6'8" teenager committed himself to the hardwood and built a reputation as a glass cleaner, leading the Hornets to a city championship appearance. They lost, but Oakley's improvement was recognized. He earned himself a scholarship offer from Division II Virginia Union, an HBCU in Richmond, Virginia. Oakley would become an immediate starter and was expected to have an immediate impact. 33-11 with 5 blocks in his second career game was pretty impactful. The next game he had 28-17. Oakley was a freshman, but he was a man among boys. His size and physicality couldn't be ignored, and he wasn't even fully developed. Oakley led by example and gave the Panthers an identity. He was clearly a Division I talent, but a big part of the reason why D1 schools gave up on recruiting him was because of his grades, falling just short of the required 2.0 GPA. A lot of programs wanted him to spend a year at JUCO. Oakley had no intention of doing that. VU coach Dave Robbins went after Oakley hard, and once it was confirmed he'd be academically ineligible for D1, Oakley chose the Panthers, which looked like a great decision after a freshman Oakley averaged a team-leading 16 points and conference-leading 12.5 boards, while helping the Panthers to a tournament appearance. There were high hopes for Oakley's sophomore season, and he again delivered, leading the Panthers to win after win after win, as VU had become one of the best teams in Division II, and Oakley had become an even more dangerous player. He started knocking down the mid-range jumper with consistency, but Robbins still wanted him down low. It was where he was at his best. He averaged 13 rebounds and over 19 points, while garnering Conference Player of the Year honors and helping Virginia Union to a 20-win season. So Charles Oakley was a star, but this was still Division II. Games weren't televised, and Oakley wasn't getting much exposure. But after Oakley led the Panthers all the way to the D2 Elite 8 as a junior, pro scouts started taking notice, and Oakley had 1 year to state his case for the NBA. And it didn't hurt that he added some weight and height over the offseason. Robbins felt he'd be the best player in Division II, and he was right. Oakley averaged 24 points and was the country's top rebounder at 17.3 per game. He dropped a career-high 43 points against Elizabeth City State, while simultaneously surpassing 2,000 career points. And with each game, he was noticing more and more NBA scouts in the stands, including soon-to-be Chicago Bulls GM Jerry Krause. Oakley led the Panthers to an undefeated regular season, and then a conference championship. But in the first round of the tournament, Virginia Union was upset by Winston-Salem State. Nonetheless, just like in high school, Oakley had done everything he could to make it to the next level. He was named the 1985 Division II Player of the Year. The NBA was still a long shot for any Division II player, but Oakley had a chance, and he got another boost when he was the only Division II player invited to the East-West College All-Star Game. He played big minutes, and his coach in that game, North Carolina's Dean Smith, was putting in a good word for him. Charles Oakley was far from a household name, but his draft stock was rising. Charles Oakley wasn't just a first rounder. He went top 10, drafted by his hometown Cavaliers. But he knew before he was even drafted that the Cavs planned to trade him, and that was fine with Oakley. He still felt that going back home wouldn't be the best situation, but he didn't know where he was being traded until he got a call from Jerry Krause. The Bulls were sending a package featuring 11th overall pick Keith Lee to acquire Charles Oakley. The Bulls had some good talent, but no one was more promising than their second-year shooting guard, Michael Jordan.
There's Jordan driving. Here's Jordan down the middle all the way. There's a kaboom. He didn't know how he was going to do it. They gave it to Poquet.
He alone provided all the offense they needed, but they were missing toughness and someone who was willing to do the dirty work. Oakley planned to be that guy. He played hard from the day he arrived. His impact was noticed, and it prompted the Bulls to trade one of their best big men in Dave Greenwood. In return, they received an aging George Gervin, who would end up becoming one of Oakley's mentors as a rookie. So between Jordan, Gervin, and forward Orlando Woolridge, the Bulls had offense. Oakley's job would come on the glass. Jordan led the team in rebounding the year prior. Oakley was confident that wouldn't happen again, and he had some extra incentive.
Michael Jordan led this club in rebounding a year ago at nearly 6 a game, and Oakley and Jordan have a bet this year of $20 a game that if Oakley at least plays 20 minutes per night, that Oakley will out-rebound Michael.
The rebounds weren't the problem, but the minutes were. Over the first half of the season, head coach Stan Albeck didn't use Oakley too often. The rookie only averaged about 13 minutes a night, but in February, he finally cracked the starting lineup. In just his second game as a starter, he had 28 points and 15 boards. A week later, he had his first career 20-rebound game. The rookie was setting an example, and with real minutes, Oakley continued producing.
The last 30 games of this season, when Oakley got playing time, he averaged 15 points, 13 rebounds a game.
A March 15th loss to Milwaukee would see him finish with a career-high 35 points, while adding 26 rebounds, with 18 of those coming on the offensive glass. Charles Oakley was a force, and he gave the Bulls something that every team wanted to have in the physical era that was the 80s NBA. He was an enforcer. He also delivered on his promise, leading the team in rebounding. But Jordan didn't have much of an opportunity to give him a run for his money. In just the third game of the year, the star guard broke his foot and missed the next 64 games. Without him, Chicago struggled. They won only 30 games in total, but it was still enough for a Bulls team with a now healthy Jordan to sneak into the playoffs, drawing a matchup with the mighty Boston Celtics. Chicago was fighting a losing battle, but Oakley held his own. He recorded double-doubles in the first 2 games, and was Chicago's leading rebounder for the series. Jordan put on one of the most impressive scoring displays of his career, but it didn't make a difference. The heavily favored Celtics swept the Bulls aside, and Oakley's rookie season ended with him averaging about 9.5 points, 8.5 rebounds, and a steal per game. Going into the 87 season, Gervin was retired, and Chicago traded Woolridge to New Jersey, but Jordan was healthy and had the green light of green lights under new head coach Doug Collins. And after his strong finish to last season, the Bulls were all in on Oakley, trading forward Sidney Green to the Pistons, and naming Oakley the starting power forward. Hollins let him know early that he was going to be a workhorse for the team, and a career-high 36.3 minutes per game confirmed that. Oakley responded by showing improvement in every area. Jordan covered the bulk of the scoring as he was putting up 37 a night, but Chicago's second leading scorer was their second-year forward. Oakley's 14.5 points per game would be a then career high, and that mid-range shot he flashed in college was reappearing in the NBA. He was the second leading rebounder as well, not for Chicago, but for the entire NBA. His 13.1 rebound average, also a career high. Oakley had 51 double-doubles and 5 games with at least 20 boards, and he showcased probably the most underrated aspect of his game, which was his passing. He even averaged a career high in assists and dished a career high 15 dimes in a late December win over Houston. However, a big reason why those assist numbers were high was because the game plan was simple: get the ball to Jordan and get out of the way. Oakley had no issue with Jordan, but there was frustration with Collins. With the way he was playing, Oakley felt he deserved to be a bigger part of the offense.
You know, Oakley has been complaining that he wants some more plays run for him. But he's got to realize there's only one basketball out there. Now, if Michael Jordan's got the ball, he can't have the ball.
But his turnovers were a major issue, and trying for more shots led to him getting away from his game at times.
Now, if one thing Charles runs into problems with Oakley is sometimes he starts forcing up shots a little too far out of his range. When he plays under control, posting up and shooting that 12-15 footer, he's an excellent basketball player.
Once Jordan got the ball, he probably wasn't going to give it up. So as it was, a lot of Oakley's points had to come on second chance opportunities. Luckily, Oakley was one of the best garbage men in the league, but still, he had shown in year 2 that he was a lot more than just a cleanup man down low, and also not one to be messed with.
I'd like to see a fight in basketball, but there's nothing like a fight to start a rivalry, and that's what we have here. This happened the last time the two teams met on the 5th of this month. The combatants were Charles Oakley with the right and Paul McKeskey, who was the recipient.
Oakley broke Paul McKeskey's nose. There'd be no suspension, but Oakley would be out $2,500. So Michael Jordan was scoring at a historic rate, yet the Bulls were one of the NBA's lowest scoring teams. The only thing saving their season was a defense near the top of the league. Jordan was all-world on the perimeter, and Oakley proved to be a formidable low-post defender, with his combination of strength and quick hands, making up for the fact that he was often giving up a few inches. And with Oakley leading the league in defensive rebounds, opponents didn't get second-chance opportunities, and Chicago allowed the second fewest points per game. The Bulls were better. They won 10 more games than last year, and at 40-42, they would again sneak into the playoffs, where again they would have to try and get through the defending champ and top-seeded Boston Celtics. Production-wise, this was one of the best series of Oakley's career. He averaged about 20 points and 15 rebounds. He recorded double-doubles in each game, and he was getting a lot of shots. The issue was that he wasn't converting them, only shooting 38% for the series, as he was giving up a lot of size to the Celtics front line, and the results were the same as last year. Another Boston sweep to end Chicago's season, as Oakley finished year 2 with averages of about 14.5 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Charles Oakley was set to begin year 3, now widely considered one of the top young forwards in the game. He and Jordan were the best players on the team, and at this point, Oakley and Jordan weren't just teammates. They were good friends. They shared common values. Oakley would say himself that he earned Michael's trust by showing respect and good manners. But you wouldn't associate those qualities with Charles Oakley if you only saw him on the court. He was one of the toughest players in the league and had a mean streak. And if you were looking for a guaranteed way to make him mad, you messed with his friend.
Michael Jordan was driving to the basket when he was grabbed around the neck by Detroit's Rick Mahorn and tossed to the floor. That emptied the benches and triggered a fight between Mahorn and the Bulls' Charles Oakley.
It was Jordan's 4th year in the league, and he was a full-blown superstar. For the past 3 seasons, it was individual glory with little team success. Now the Bulls were getting competitive. Teams were looking to make life miserable for Jordan. But when Oakley felt it got excessive, that's when he stepped in. Michael Jordan was the Wayne Gretzky of the NBA. And just like Gretzky, he needed a bodyguard. Draft day 1987 was also very kind to the Bulls, Krause took Clemson forward Horace Grant 10th overall and traded to acquire 5th overall pick Scottie Pippen. Neither would have a major impact as rookies, but the potential was through the roof. Oakley showed them tough love, but it was because he wanted them to be ready.
He knocks Pippen down just as easily as he'd knock any opponent coming into the basket. And he does it in a way that tells other players like Horace and Pippen that this is a tough league and you got to go in with the big guys and mix it up.
Oakley settled into his usual role. He was again the second best rebounder in the NBA and was a top 3 scorer on the Bulls. But he was getting even less shots than last year, so the same frustrations re-emerged.
Oakley's problem, if you want to call it that, a terrific rebounder, is that he wants to be involved in the offense, and that's a recurring thing.
Oakley knew he was capable of more, but many wanted him to just stick with what he's best at.
You know, if Charles Oakley would just be satisfied with just rebounding on the both ends of the court, making a few passes, and maybe averaging 14 points, he'd be a much better player than just always thinking too much at the offensive end of the court.
Frustrated or not, Oakley gave 100% every night and continued to outmuscle whoever he had to corral the rebounds. Late in the year, he was rewarded with a 6-year extension, and now a deeper Bulls team had become a threat. They won 12 of their first 15 and were 9 games above 500 come the All-Star break, and a season-high 6-game win streak in late April helped them secure their first 50-win season since 1974. They were now the 3 seed and considered much more dangerous as they entered a first-round matchup with Cleveland. Oakley had as good a series as you could ask for against the Cavs. He was the Bulls' second leading scorer. He averaged less than 11 points per game, but with Jordan averaging 45 points, there weren't a lot more shots to go around. Yet Oakley really made his presence felt on the boards. In the second last game of the season, he dominated the Cavs for a career-high 35 rebounds. And in this series, he picked up right where he left off. He averaged over 13 a night to lead all players. The Bulls jumped out to a 2-0 lead, but the Cavs took care of business in Cleveland, setting up a winner-go-home Game 5. Oakley was AWOL in the first quarter. His first rebound didn't come until the second, yet he still finished with 20 boards. None more important than his final offensive rebound.
Wherever it is, Sparrow from the corner. Jordan tips it, no good. Oakley battles. They got a foul. Charles Oakley got the big rebound for Chicago, and Jordan is fouled by Price.
That'll be the biggest rebound of Charles Oakley's career.
Oakley's last-second effort to keep the ball alive led to Jordan icing the game at the line. The Bulls were heading to the second round for the first time in 7 years. Round 2 brought the Pistons, who were no strangers to physical play. Oakley wasn't expected to score the ball in this series. His job was to keep Detroit off the glass. He did his best, averaging over 12 rebounds a night.
Oakley with a nice, strong rebound.
Boy, he's playing big. He is really playing big on the board.
But the two teams got more physical with each game. The Pistons were beating up on Jordan. Oakley was taking exception.
There's a fight right there. Lambier and Jordan. Yes, indeed. There are punches thrown. Oakley was coming to the defense of Michael Jordan that time.
And Oakley had his own battle going on with the Pistons' resident tough guy, Rick Mahorn. Oakley held his own, and Jordan had a great series, although Detroit made sure he didn't torch them like he did Cleveland. Overall, Chicago just wasn't ready for Detroit's physicality and were dispelled in 5 games. With Oakley's season wrapping up with him averaging about 12.5 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. It wasn't the end they were hoping for, but growth was clearly happening in Chicago. Pieces were starting to fall into place, and it looked like only a matter of time before they were challenging for a title. But something Bulls management felt they were missing was a true center. And with Horace Grant playing very well in the Pistons series, they now had 2 starting caliber power forwards. One would be shipped away, and it wouldn't be Grant. In late June, Oakley was sent to New York in exchange for Bill Cartwright. It netted the Bulls the center that they needed, but Oakley felt that the reason it was him was because of his ongoing disagreements with Doug Collins around having more plays run for him. Whatever the reason, Oakley was fine with it. He ended up on a team that wanted him. Knicks head coach Rick Pitino made that very clear. Michael Jordan, however, wasn't happy. He lost his best friend on the team and his bodyguard, while New York had just gained an identity. Oakley joined an up-and-coming Knicks team. They had a good young backcourt featuring point guard Mark Jackson and shooting guard Gerald Wilkins. Their star was Oakley's draft mate in center Patrick Ewing, and Oakley remained in a similar role as he had been in Chicago. He took less shots than last year, but in Chicago he wanted more shots to help take the pressure off Jordan. In New York, the ball was spread around more. No one took anywhere near the number of shots that Jordan did, but it was a good strategy because New York was one of the highest scoring teams in the league. Oakley's overall rebounding numbers dipped now that he was playing with a dominant center, yet Ewing credited his rebounding numbers to his new front court mate. Even if Oakley didn't secure the board, he could completely seal off his man to give Ewing an easier path to the ball. But on the offensive glass, Oakley's numbers improved to over 4 per game. You needed an army to keep him from getting the putback. And why was Oakley so effective? Simple. He liked the contact. His football background was apparent on the hardwood. He wanted to hit you. So Charles Oakley was doing exactly what he was brought in to do, and a little bit extra.
He's giving them a power forward that can really dominate the boards, but he also gave them something that no one thought was an outlet pass that also triggers their fast break. And he's a guy that can also score. So he has been a definite contribution to the Knicks' success thus far in this season.
He even started hoisting up three-pointers late in the year, and it was no coincidence that the Knicks had their first 50-win season in nearly a decade after adding Oakley, and were now set to take on the 76ers in the first round. Oakley would have his hands full with the Sixers' Charles Barkley. Barkley got his points, but Oakley did a masterful job in keeping him out of the low post and limiting the Sixers' second chances. And on the other end, Oakley secured plenty of second chances for his own team, averaging 6 offensive rebounds per game, and he saved his best for last, going for 17 points and 17 boards in a Game 3 overtime win to complete the sweep for New York. The next round would bring both an old friend and a new enemy. Chicago knew that one key to winning the series would be to keep Oakley off the glass, and all things considered, they did a good job. Oakley still averaged 10 boards for the series, but the Bulls held him to single-digit rebounds in 3 games, which would all be Knicks losses. Then on defense, the Knicks didn't have many answers, as 4 of 5 Bulls starters shot 54% or better across the 6-game series, a series that ended in Chicago's favor, as Oakley wrapped up his first year in New York with averages of about 13 points, 10.5 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. The Knicks core didn't see any major changes over the offseason. However, Pitino had resigned and was replaced with Stu Jackson. Under Jackson, New York slowed it down. They scored less points, but also allowed less points. The new play style benefited Oakley's offensive production. The Knicks operated more in the half court and less in transition. Oakley had more opportunity to set up for a bucket down low or his patented mid-range jumper, and it put him closer to the hoop on more possessions. So the Oakley putbacks would again be backbreakers for Knicks opponents.
With the rebound. Oh, what an effort by Charles Oakley. Power of power. Wow.
Overall, Oakley had the best scoring season of his career and finished second on the team to Ewing, while also leading the team in rebounding. The Ewing and Oakley front line was the Knicks' strength, but in the backcourt, there was some feuding. Mark Jackson was the starter, but second-year backup Rod Strickland felt he should be in that role. So in late February, the Knicks sent an unhappy Strickland to the Spurs for veteran Maurice Cheeks, who would eventually supplant Jackson as the starter, with the Knicks boasting a stingier defense with Cheeks in the starting lineup. However, Oakley and Cheeks didn't get much time on the court together, as Oakley broke his hand in late March. It sidelined him for the rest of the regular season. The Knicks were 39-27 when Oakley went down. They would go 6-9 without him, including losing the final 3 games of the season. Their 47-35 record was enough for the playoffs, but they weren't looking great entering their first-round matchup with Boston. Oakley was expected to miss the postseason, but come Game 1, he was back, yet was playing limited minutes in a bench role over the first 2 games. And after Boston humiliated New York to take a 2-0 lead, the series looked all but over. Jackson put Oakley back in the starting lineup for Game 3. He finished with 14 points and 13 boards, and the Knicks stayed alive. They evened the series in Game 4 with a blowout of their own. They were heading back to Boston for the series decider, but they had the odds stacked against them.
Good afternoon again, everyone. I'm Dick Stockton. A week ago, no one ever dreamed that we would be here for a fifth game. Not after the Celtics humiliated the Knicks in game number 2, but the Knicks came back, as you know, and the two facts that will not go away are the fact that the New York Knicks have not won in Boston Garden for 26 straight games, and furthermore, only 2 teams in history have ever come back from a 2-0 deficit. Very big obstacles indeed.
7 on the clock. There's a good feed. Newman tipped up and in by Charles Oakley. Who else? 4-point lead. Oakley drives in, and it's 97-91, and the biggest lead right now for the Knicks.
See, this is 2 guys working. That's how Oakley gets paid. He gets paid to put his body into the chest of your big man.
With their season on the line, Oakley had one of the greatest games of his career. He dropped a postseason career-high 26 points and pulled down 17 rebounds. He was instrumental in keeping the Celtics off the offensive glass. The Knicks did the unthinkable and knocked off the Celtics. Next up was the defending champs. Game 1 would be one of the most embarrassing losses in Knicks history. Oakley only received 15 minutes, unexpectedly benched midway through the third. He came back strong in Game 2, putting up 22 points, 15 boards, and 4 steals. It still wasn't enough. 20 rebounds from Oakley back in New York would help the Knicks get their first win of the series, but it was also their last win, as the Pistons wrapped it up in 5, and Oakley ended his season with averages of about 14.5 points, 12 rebounds, and a steal per game. Over the summer, Oakley's name popped up in some trade rumors. Ultimately, he remained a Knick. New York was hoping for a bounce-back year, but the next season started, and it was even worse. After 15 games, New York sat at a disappointing 7-8. They had just won their first game after dropping 5 straight when the Knicks sent Stu Jackson packing, replacing him with John McLeod. But there wouldn't be much improvement under McLeod. Oakley remained one of the best rebounders in the league, leading the Knicks in that category, but his usage on offense had decreased, with McLeod giving a lot more shots to an aging Kiki Vandeweghe. The overall roster hadn't changed much, but behind the scenes, there was a lot of personnel changes. Not only did the Knicks have 2 coaches this year, they went through 3 different GMs. And with each GM having different philosophies, the Knicks never really had direction. They did have a solid defense, and it was clear that that should be their focus. But they weren't fully committed to that defensive identity, and for now, it wasn't good enough to make up for their below-average offense. So Oakley did what he could, corralling plenty of rebounds, fighting for second-chance points, and setting the tone on the defensive end. But the Knicks couldn't reverse their downward trend. This season, they couldn't even crack 500, finishing with a 39-43 record, and barely squeaking into the playoffs, as they drew Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And much like their season, this series was just one big disappointment. The Knicks couldn't get anything to fall on offense, and didn't put up much of a fight on defense. The Bulls were just on another level, and the Knicks went down quietly in 3 games, with Oakley's year ending with him averaging about 11 points, 12 rebounds, and a steal per game. New York had too much talent to be playing the way they were. They were lacking an identity and the right man to lead them. Over the summer, they found both. The Knicks made the biggest splash of the offseason, and it wasn't a player, it was a coach, bringing in Pat Riley, who won 4 titles as the Lakers head coach during the 80s. However, the Knicks were far from Showtime. As Oakley described it, they were more like nightclub bouncers. But that's why Riley was a great coach. He adjusted his style to fit New York's personnel. They adopted a defensive identity, rooted in toughness and conditioning. But Riley would make some personnel changes for some better suited players. New York signed little-known forward Anthony Mason. Scrappy third-year guard John Starks was given a much larger role. And then there was the X-Man, Xavier McDaniel, a former All-Star. And just like Oakley, he was known as one of the toughest players in the league. In fact, the two had already gotten very well acquainted a couple years earlier. So now the Knicks were loaded with hard-nosed, defensive-minded players who wouldn't take anything from anyone. And rookie point guard Greg Anthony summed it up pretty well. The Knicks were either going to win the game or win the fight. This season marked a shift in Oakley's role. Riley built the offense around Ewing. McDaniel took on some of the scoring responsibility, and Starks was one of the best sixth men in the league, so Oakley was seldom used in the offense, and would get a lot of his points off putbacks. which is exactly how Riley liked it. And anyways, New York's focus wasn't on scoring the ball, it was on stopping their opponents from doing the same. They played an extremely physical brand of basketball while maintaining discipline. No shots were easy, and the Knicks gave up few second chances. Oakley embodied this playstyle. He was all about the intangibles. A lot of his impact came on the plays that didn't show up on the stat sheet, and more than anything, he was an intimidator. The Knicks played slow and controlled the pace. They made their opponents play their game, and with their newfound identity, they became a force in the East. It took some time to gel, but when the season ended, they were once again a 50-win team. They drew the Pistons in the first round, and Oakley had one objective.
And his mission in this series to stop Dennis Rodman.
Oakley wasn't going to back down from the challenge of containing the league's top rebounder. Rodman had averaged nearly 19 a game in the regular season. In Game 1, Oakley held him to just 4, and New York embarrassed Detroit. Oakley held Rodman to 7 the next game, and pulled down 18 of his own. Yet the Pistons found a way to tie the series. Oakley had double-digit rebounds in each of the next 2 games, yet so did Rodman, and after 4, the teams remained tied. Then even though Oakley sustained a hip pointer in Game 5 and played limited minutes, the Knicks pulled out the win and were through to round 2. They got a rematch with Jordan and the Bulls, and this year, it would be a whole different series. New York knew they couldn't rattle Jordan, so they'd instead go after Pippen. McDaniel was a thorn in his side all series, trying to get under his skin. Oakley was in a lot of pain and had little impact over the first 2 games, but the Knicks managed to steal Game 1 in Chicago. Back in New York, Oakley was playing his usual minutes. Chicago regained home court advantage with a Game 3 win, but 12 rebounds from Oakley in Game 4 helped tie the series again. And after 6, it was still tied. But Oakley was again struggling with his hip. There was no way he was sitting out, but he wasn't 100%. New York had their chance to knock off the champs, but Jordan completely took over, and Pippen played his best game of the series. Chicago ran away with it in the second half. Another season had been ended by the Bulls, with Oakley's year wrapping up with averages of about 6 points, 8.5 rebounds, and a steal per game. The Knicks had come within 1 game of the conference finals. If they just ran it back, they had a real shot at a championship. For the most part they did, except for one big change. Xavier McDaniel was now a Celtic, choosing to sign with Boston after feeling that New York's offer was too low. One of the key pieces to last year's success was gone. McDaniel's absence was such a gut punch because New York had lost him for nothing, so the Knicks tried to make up for it by shipping Mark Jackson to the Clippers. In return, they received a package including forward Charles Smith and veteran point guard Doc Rivers, and they added some additional scoring. By acquiring longtime Dallas Maverick Rolando Blackman, Starks continued to improve and would eventually become a starter, while Mason filled in for him as one of the league's top 6 men. Oakley's role was again as a glass cleaner and defender. He had the 3rd lowest defensive rating in the NBA, and was one of 3 Knicks to finish top 5 in DPOY voting. He wasn't a shot blocker or a pickpocket, but he did have active hands. He gave up no ground to his opponents with his physical play, and for as big as he was mobile and one of the best help defenders in the league. And after a bit of an underwhelming start, New York caught fire. They went 11-3 in the month of February. They won 9 straight to begin March, and over their final 41 games, they went 34-7, as they finished with the East's best record at 60-22. They had the coach of the year and secured home court advantage as they began the playoffs with the Indiana Pacers. It was a scrappy series from the jump, and Oakley redeemed himself for last year's underwhelming playoffs. He tied for the series lead in rebounding and set the tone with his physicality. He played the role of intimidator all series, and his 13 points and 13 rebounds in Game 4 helped the Knicks wrap it up. Round 2 would bring an inexperienced but dangerous Charlotte Hornets team. The Hornets were young, but they had a formidable frontcourt duo in Larry Johnson and Alonzo Mourning. Oakley spent the whole series trying to get under their skin, but he also spent the whole series playing great basketball. He averaged a double-double on over 54% shooting. On defense, he forced 2 turnovers a night, and as he always did, he put his body on the line.
Charles Oakley has been the star for the Knicks. Finds Oakley. Yes, and it counts.
Charlotte put up a great fight, but New York's experience was the difference maker. and the Knicks won in 5. Last year, Chicago had kept them out of the conference finals. This year, they'd be their opponent. Oakley was Oakley to begin the series. He pulled down 30 rebounds across the first 2 games, and had a Game 2 double-double. The top-seeded Knicks took care of business at home, as they went to Chicago with a 2-0 lead, but 2 games later, and the series was tied. Oakley had struggled on the road, and the Knicks needed more from him in Game 5. However, it would be his worst game of the series, with 6 points and a playoff low 4 rebounds. Yet the Knicks still had a chance to win it, down by 1 in the waning seconds. This will always be remembered as the Charles Smith game, but it was a team loss. New York missed 15 of their 35 free throws, and to this day, Oakley is still confused as to why Riley never made any adjustments for the Bulls' full-court trap. So New York dropped the all-important Game 5 in the most demoralizing way. The Knicks put up a great fight in Game 6, but Chicago made the plays down the stretch and sent New York packing once again, as Oakley finished his year with averages of about 7 points, 8.5 rebounds, and a steal per game. New York had gotten closer to the finals in each of the past 3 years, yet each time they were stopped by one team led by one man. Shortly before the 94 season, that one man announced his retirement from the NBA. The East was wide open. The Knicks became the team to beat, and Oakley knew this was their chance. Oakley hadn't been much of an offensive threat over the past few years, but this season that would have to change. Starks and Smith both missed significant time. They were 2 of New York's best point producers. Oakley had never lost his ability to score. It just hadn't been his role. Oakley had been very vocal about his lack of minutes last year, especially in the playoffs. Now, Riley needed him.
I tried to do everything they wanted me to do, but I told them, last year I can do more. I need more minutes. And this year I got more minutes.
We need him on the court to win. I made a huge mistake last year. When everybody talks about, what happened in Game 5, probably the biggest thing that happened is that he was sitting on the bench.
So Oakley would dust off his automatic mid-range jumper and put up his highest scoring average in 5 years. But that didn't mean he was sacrificing any other parts of his game. He also led the team in rebounding on his highest average in 4 years. A lot of his points were still coming off putbacks. His 4.3 offensive rebounds per game were a career high. And he was still on the best defensive team in the league, turning in the lowest defensive rating of his career. And finally, Oakley would be recognized, named a member of the first team All-Defense. And he captured another honor that had eluded him for years. Charles Oakley was an NBA All-Star. So individually, it was a dream season for the Knicks enforcer. But for the team, it wasn't as perfect. On top of the injuries to Starks and Smith, the Knicks were dealt a huge blow when Rivers tore his ACL 19 games into the season. They tried to go on without him, but knew they couldn't waste their best chance at a title. So in early January, they acquired Derek Harper, a great two-way point guard. The Knicks were still a force, but the injuries definitely had an impact. They reached a low point in late February after losing 6 times in 8 games, capped off with a blowout loss to the Suns in Phoenix, which saw Oakley and the Suns' Charles Barkley nearly come to blows. But as Oakley would say, this marked the turning point of their season. Everyone was frustrated. The Knicks were supposed to head to Sacramento for the last game of their road trip, but they had a day off in between. So without telling the team, Riley instead had the plane take them to Reno. He gave each player a little spending money and gave them the day to get their mind off basketball, with Oakley commending Riley for knowing when to give the players a needed break. After this, Riley made some lineup changes, and the Knicks went 21-6 over the remaining games. They finished as the 2 seed in the East and got a first-round matchup with New Jersey. The Knicks took Game 1, but Oakley had a down performance. In Game 2, he had probably the best playoff game of his career, with 25 points and 24 boards in a win. The Nets squeaked one out in Game 3, but New York wrapped it up 2 nights later. Their next opponent was the Bulls, without Jordan. This time, New York had to win. Just like last year, the Knicks took the first 2 games at home, and just like last year, the Bulls evened it back in Chicago. But this time, Game 5 would go to the Knicks, with Oakley chipping in 14 points and 11 rebounds. Yet they couldn't get the job done in Chicago, so it was Game 7 at the Garden. If New York lost, it would be the ultimate failure, but Oakley made sure that wouldn't happen. He scored 17 points and pulled down 20 rebounds. On defense, he stole the ball 3 times, and he helped limit Horace Grant to just 4 rebounds. After 4 years, the Knicks had finally eliminated the Bulls. The conference finals would bring an Indiana Pacers team that New York didn't have too much trouble with last year. This year was a different story. This would be one of the better playoff series of Oakley's career. He was the Knicks' second leading scorer and averaged a double-double. New York jumped out to a convincing 2-0 lead at home, and a sweep seemed possible. But Oakley had some trouble getting his shot to fall in Indiana, and the Pacers made it a series, with the teams tied heading back to New York. Then after Game 5, New York's back was against the wall. New York had to win on the road to save their season. Oakley chipped in 14-9, and Starks stepped up with 26. The Knicks stayed alive. Game 7 was back at home. Oakley again had 14, and was instrumental in keeping Indiana off the boards. The final offensive rebound the Pacers gave up would be the most memorable of all.
With the pick, here's Starks. John Starks with the three. Ewing puts it down. And the Knicks by 1.
After years of disappointment, the Knicks had made it out of the East. There was one last team standing in their way, led by league MVP Hakeem Olajuwon. The marquee matchup was Ewing and Olajuwon, but Oakley continued his standout postseason in the finals. He again averaged a double-double, and had his work cut out for him trying to keep Otis Thorpe and Robert Horry off the boards. The Knicks stole Game 2 in Houston, but gave it right back in New York. 20 rebounds from Oakley in Game 4 helped the Knicks tie it up. Then they took a stranglehold in Game 5. 2 nights later, back in Houston, Starks had the game of his life, and the Knicks were one shot away from a championship.
Here is Starks. With a look from 3, it's tipped, and it's knocked away, and the Rockets win! The ball was tipped. It was partially blocked.
The MVP saved the day for Houston, and for the 3rd straight series, New York was going to a Game 7, but this time it was on the road. Oakley had a good outing with 10 points and 14 boards, but he would foul out. Starks infamously had a game to forget, going 2 of 18 from the field, as the Knicks watched their championship dreams slip away. Many felt that Riley should have switched in Rolando Blackman, but confusingly, he never did. Oakley would shed some light on this in later years, saying that Riley kept Blackman on the bench as punishment for defying Riley's no wives on the road rule earlier in the playoffs. As Oakley would say, it was the biggest mistake of Riley's career, and Oakley would wrap up his season with averages of about 12 points, 12 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. The Knicks were so close. For now, Jordan was still playing baseball. They had to give it another try with the same core. But had they just reached their peak? New York remained a defensive force, but they were getting older. A lot of their players were banged up last year. This year it seemed they would be healthier. The 10-year pro Oakley got off to one of the best starts of his career. He was scoring like he was back in Chicago, and rebounding like he always had. But he had been playing with a dislocated toe the whole time. And after dropping a season-high 20 points on Christmas Day against Chicago, he decided the pain was too much, opting for surgery, which sidelined him for the next 2 months. And when he came back, he couldn't recapture his early season form. His production took a big hit, and he saw an uptick in his fouls, likely due to an NBA rule change. But he was still an important part of the Knicks defense. And luckily for Oakley, the Knicks had went on a tear after he went down, going 22-6 in his absence. And with everyone else remaining mostly healthy, the Knicks turned in a 55-win season and got matched up with Cleveland in round 1. Oakley came out strong with 19-11 in a Game 1 win, but the Cavs evened it 2 nights later. Oakley wouldn't have any more performances like he did in Game 1, but he was a pest on defense and a big reason why New York dominated Cleveland on the boards. He was even keeping the defense honest with his shooting. And after winning both games in Cleveland, the Knicks were set for a rematch of last year's conference finals. Oakley turned it up in this series. His shot wasn't falling all that often, but he had 3 double-doubles and still scored in double figures in each of the first 6 games. And as he always did, he played his usual tough defense, put his body on the line, and made sure he set the tone. The series was a dogfight, but it's a series that's remembered for 2 things. 8 points in 9 seconds.
And a steal. Miller retreats to the three-point line and hits again.
And Ewing's missed layup in Game 7.
To Ewing, down to 3, down to 2. Ewing, not over the hit, and it's all over. The Indiana
New York's season ended in heartbreaking fashion, and Oakley wrapped up the year with averages of about 10 points, 9 rebounds, and a steal per game. The first domino fell just a few weeks later. Riley faxed in his resignation. The Knicks were without a coach, and Oakley knew that New York's championship window had closed. New York wanted Chuck Daly, but he didn't want them, so the Knicks would turn to Don Nelson, a good coach in his own right, but not one who had ever been known for his defense. Nelson was famous for his fast-paced Nelly ball. New York's aging roster was not suited for that, but he still tried it. The players didn't respond too well, especially Ewing and Starks. Nelson wanted to spread the ball around. He made Anthony Mason the primary ball handler. It wasn't working too bad, and the new-look Knicks were winning games. But Ewing wasn't getting the touches he wanted. His deteriorating relationship with Nelson turned into an all-out feud. Oakley wasn't bothered too much. He was cool with Nelson, and Nelson was cool with him, and his role hadn't really changed. If anything, Oakley was getting annoyed with the constant complaining of his teammates. But then Oakley broke his thumb in mid-February. He needed surgery and was sidelined for a while. During that time, things in New York just kept getting worse. Reports had come out that Nelson was looking to move in a different direction, willing to trade both Starks and the franchise player Ewing. There were rumors of Nelson even trying to orchestrate a deal to land Shaq. When Oakley returned from injury, both of his longtime teammates were still there, but Nelson was gone. According to Oakley, Ewing and Starks had led a mutiny, and with the Knicks sitting at 9 games above 500, they let Nelson go and replaced him with assistant Jeff Van Gundy. Van Gundy went back to the Riley way. New York slowed it down, and Ewing was again the focal point. The Knicks went 13-10 the rest of the way. It wasn't what Knicks fans were used to, but with all the drama, a 47-win season wasn't too bad. New York again kicked off the postseason by taking on the Cavs. But Oakley wasn't 100%. An inadvertent elbow from Ewing late in the year had fractured his orbital bone and blurred his vision. But it didn't seem to affect him too much, as he averaged nearly 13 points on 50% shooting in a first-round sweep of Cleveland. Then came round 2, and a man New York was very familiar with. Jordan returned late last season, but it wasn't until this season that he looked like himself again. Chicago was having a historic year, setting an NBA record with 72 wins. They looked to be unbeatable. However, Oakley didn't have a lot of time to worry about Jordan, because the Bulls had added another guy that would be taking up all of Oakley's attention. New York put up a fight, but lost the first 2 games on the road. Oakley rebounded well, but so did Rodman. Oakley had a Game 3 double-double, and the Knicks survived 46 from Jordan to get their first win of the series. Yet even with Oakley putting up 17 in Game 4 and another double-double in Game 5, the Jordan-led Bulls again proved to be too much, as Oakley wrapped up the season with averages of about 11.5 points, 8.5 rebounds, and a steal per game. The Knicks were getting old. They were still a great team, but it seemed they had reached their peak with the roster they had. Yet they wanted to maximize the few years of the Ewing era that they had left, so they got busy in the offseason. They let Derek Harper walk. They tried to take some of the scoring load off Ewing and keep defenses from collapsing on him by bringing in sharpshooting swingman Allen Houston. Then, with Mason unhappy about his decreased role after the Nelson firing, they packaged him to Charlotte for another tough forward in Larry Johnson. The Knicks definitely looked different, but would they be better? At this point, you knew exactly what to expect from Oakley. He may have been moving slower, but he was still good for about 11 points a night, relying on his mid-range jumper more and more as the years went on. And he was still a force on the glass, cleaning up a lot of his teammates' misses. And while the Knicks played great team defense, you need the right individuals for that. And Oakley was one of those individuals, even averaging nearly a steal and a half per game. Most important was that Oakley was healthy. After 2 injury-filled seasons, he played 80 games. The 2 games he missed weren't due to injury. They were due to another throwdown in his career-long saga with the NBA's other Charles. The new-look Knicks took some time to build their chemistry, but the personnel was working for what they wanted to do. They were still one of the top defenses in the league and had a more balanced offensive attack, with their bench now being led by 6th Man of the Year John Starks. They won an impressive 57 games and locked up the 3 seed. They drew Charlotte in round 1. Oakley did a bit of everything. He shot 60% from the field, led the Knicks in steals, and still kept making the hustle plays. However, Anthony Mason would get the better of him on the boards. But it didn't matter, because the Knicks took it in a sweep, setting up a matchup with the Miami Heat, who were led by a familiar face. Oakley was a hound on the glass to begin the series. He recorded 3 straight double-doubles, and got a lot of his points off putbacks. After 4 games, the Knicks were up 3-1, but late in Game 5, as New York headed towards a loss, one event would change the series. PJ Brown and Charlie Ward got into it. Brown flipped Ward. A lot of Knicks came to their teammates' defense, but this was the worst thing they could have done. Brown was suspended for the rest of the series. New York was dealt a much bigger blow. For leaving the bench, Ewing, Starks, Houston, and Johnson were all given 1-game suspensions. But the Knicks needed to dress 9 players, so the suspensions were staggered. Houston and Ewing for Game 6, Johnson and Starks for Game 7. Oakley stepped up with 18 and 12 in Game 6, but Miami got the win. Then 2 nights later, the undermanned Knicks fell to the Heat to end their season. Oakley finished with averages of about 11 points, 10 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. New York was hungry going into the following season. They felt they had been cheated in the playoffs. They wanted another crack at the Heat, but first they'd have to get to the postseason. There was no reason to believe they couldn't until late December. Ewing broke his wrist. He would be sidelined for the rest of the regular season. The only other center on the roster was Chris Dudley. Instead of going out and finding a new replacement, Van Gundy decided that Oakley would fill in, and he played admirably. Taking on the role of defensive anchor, Oakley kept opponents off the offensive glass and averaged a career-high 1.6 steals. And while he wasn't a shot blocker like Ewing, he protected the rim in his own way. Anyone that came near the hoop was going to feel it. The Knicks didn't have much of an offense, but they remained elite on the defensive end. Oakley was even named second-team all-defense. New York won 43 games, and as luck would have it, they got Miami in round 1. Oakley had a great series. He averaged 10 points and led all players in rebounding. The teams went back and forth, and after 4 games, it was tied. However, late in Game 4, a fight had broken out between Larry Johnson and Alonzo Mourning. Oakley came to Johnson's defense. He took a hit from Mourning, but he didn't retaliate. It was a heads-up move from a veteran who knew the team couldn't afford to have him suspended for Game 5. But Johnson would be suspended, as would Mourning. It was a big loss for the Knicks, but a bigger loss for Miami. And without Zoe down low, Oakley feasted in Game 5, finishing with 18 points and 13 boards, as New York embarrassed the Heat on their home court. Next up was Indiana. Oakley had 15 and 11 in a Game 1 loss. In Game 2, Ewing made his return. Oakley spent the rest of the series as a rebounder and defender, but Indiana was too much, and the Knicks were defeated in 5 games, as Oakley ended his year with averages of about 9 points, 9 rebounds, and 1.5 steals per game. For the past decade, Charles Oakley had given his blood, sweat, and tears to the Knicks organization. Less than 2 months after their loss to the Pacers, his services were no longer needed.
Charles Oakley loved everything about being a Knick, but in an effort to get younger, they made him a Toronto Raptor.
Of course, Oakley is going to be very emotional. He has said that. He's upset with the trade.
Oakley was far from thrilled about the trade. He had to leave his home and his country while going from a team with championship aspirations to a team in just their 4th year of existence. The Raptors, however, had gained one of the cagiest veterans in the league. Yet Oakley was also back in a situation a lot like his first few years in Chicago. Toronto had a young, high-flying rookie who many looked at as the heir apparent to Air Jordan, and he needed a bodyguard. The Raptors had 2 young, promising players who happened to be cousins, in Vince Carter and Tracy McGrady, but Carter was touted as the next Jordan. They had their similarities, but they also had their differences. For Oakley, the more lighthearted Carter was a nice change from the no-nonsense Jordan. But back then, Oakley was young, with his whole career ahead of him. Now he was 35 years old. Still effective, he would even start every game of the lockout-shortened 99 season. Most of his numbers took a dip, and his offensive rebounds were some of the lowest of his career. But that's because he spent a lot more time at the top of the key. Teams had to respect his mid-range game, but they also had to respect his court vision. Oakley was used a lot more as a facilitator, and put up his highest assist numbers since his days in Chicago. The Raptors had some exciting moments and a respectable season, but in the end, they would fall short of a playoff berth. It was the first time in Oakley's 14-year career that he wouldn't have a postseason, as he finished his first year in Toronto with averages of about 7 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. Oakley re-signed with Toronto after the season, and the Raptors continued to surround their young duo with veterans. Oakley spent the 2000 season, much like 99, pulling down rebounds on the defensive end and hanging out around the top of the key on offense, helping keep the lane open for the Raptors' high flyers. Carter was great as a rookie, but in year 2, he was playing like a superstar. And with McGrady leading the second unit, the Raptors were a much improved team. They only got better as the season wore on, and with 45 wins on the year, they hadn't only secured their first winning season, they were also making their first trip to the playoffs. And their opponent was the New York Knicks. Obviously, Oakley had extra incentive to win this series, and he played great. He had 11 points, 7 boards, and 6 assists in a close Game 1 loss. Game 2 was even tighter, but the Knicks pulled it out in the final seconds. Then while Oakley had 10 points, 13 boards, and 4 steals in Game 3, the Knicks had the experience and completed the sweep of the Raptors. As Oakley wrapped up his year with averages of about 7 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. McGrady left over the offseason, so it was the Vince Carter show in 01. Oakley would have his most productive year as a Raptor, and probably his most infamous.
Toronto's Charles Oakley was suspended for 3 games without pay and fined $15,000 by the NBA today for punching Clippers guard Jeff McInnis this morning. That's McInnis, and this is the aftermath. McInnis trying his darndest to get back at Oakley, but he was restrained by teammates and coaches.
According to Oakley, over the summer he and McInnis had been seeing the same girl. During a phone call with that girl, Oakley overheard McInnis screaming at her to get off the phone with him. Oakley didn't appreciate that. He knew he'd see McInnis and the Clippers twice this season, so he waited. Come morning shoot-around on December 1st, 2000, McInnis didn't get off the court when he was supposed to. Oakley used this as an opportunity to introduce himself, punching McInnis once, and in turn receiving a hefty fine and 3-game suspension. But Oakley didn't miss much time aside from that, appearing in 78 games for a Raptors team who won 47 games. They got a rematch with New York in round 1. Oakley averaged about 10 points and 6 boards. The series went the distance, and after dropping 12 points in Game 5, Oakley got one of the sweetest playoff wins of his career. The second round brought the Sixers. Oakley hit double figures in 4 games and recorded 3 double-doubles. The series also went the distance and went down to the wire, but in the end, the Raptors came up 1 shot short of a conference finals appearance, with Oakley's season seeing him average about 9.5 points, 9.5 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. After the season, the Raptors traded Oakley back to where it all began, where coincidentally, he would be coached by the player he was traded to New York for all those years ago. Chicago wasn't going to be challenging for a title anytime soon, and Oakley was brought in more for his veteran presence, providing mentorship to Chicago's 2 new high schoolers in Tyson Chandler and Eddie Curry. But he didn't ride the bench either, starting 36 of the 57 games he appeared in for a Bulls team that finished with just 21 wins. As Oakley wrapped up his year with averages of about 4 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. The following season was another full-circle moment for Oakley. Out in Washington, Michael Jordan was set to begin his farewell tour, and in early October, Oakley would sign on to join his good friend. But at this point, Jordan had league-wide respect, so he wouldn't be needing a bodyguard. The Wizards also featured the same man that had coached Oakley and Jordan back in Chicago, in Doug Collins. But Collins wouldn't use Oakley too much, as he only appeared in about half the games for a Wizards team who finished at 37-45, as Oakley averaged about 2 points, 2.5 rebounds, and an assist per game. Oakley would be without a team for most of the 04 season, but in mid-March, he would sign on with the Houston Rockets as injury insurance, appearing in 7 games before being released about 3 weeks later, with Oakley's brief stint seeing him average about 1.5 points, half a rebound, and half an assist per game. And finally, after 19 years, Charles Oakley's NBA career came to an end, but he wasn't done with basketball by any means. In 2007, at the age of 44, he was reported to be eyeing an NBA comeback, but it never came to fruition. Then a few weeks later, he was back on an NBA bench, except he was an assistant coach, joining the Charlotte Bobcats staff for the 2011 season, and he was still the same old Oakley.
Coaches walk out, all you see is Oak make a U-turn. Right back in front of Gerald Wallace. Now, didn't I say I was gonna slap you? Stood right in front of, and Gerald didn't get up. He standing. I stood in front. I said, "Oh, you are a coach now. Please don't slap Gerald Wallace."
He later went to the Big Three, Again, he was the same old Oakley. And then most recently, in February of 2017, Oakley was being escorted out of the same arena he went to war in for a decade. The Knicks and owner James Dolan released a statement alleging that Oakley was yelling at him and was asked to leave because of this, and then became physical with staff, which led to his removal. Oakley says that Dolan was eyeing him as soon as he sat down, and when he was asked to leave for no reason, that's when he got upset. The NBA and Michael Jordan tried to orchestrate a truce between the two, but in Oakley's eyes, the damage had already been done, and a lot like most Knicks fans, he doesn't have much respect for Dolan. But overall, Oakley has set himself up well in retirement, becoming very active in the business world, as he is the owner of several different companies. Charles Oakley is one of the most feared men in NBA history, but he was a lot more than a tough guy. He didn't always have the best reaction or make the best decision, but when it came to his intimidation, he stayed true to himself. If he felt you were out of line, he'd let you know one way or another. But you don't stay in the NBA for nearly 2 decades because you're intimidating. Charles Oakley was a physical and smart defender. He was one of the fiercest rebounders to ever come through the league, and he had some finesse to his power game, with his soft touch in the mid-range and great court vision. And most impressively, he had the success he did as a Division II player. Charles Oakley will forever be synonymous with the New York Knicks. A player who needs to be measured by his heart and intangibles, not his numbers. But that's it for today's episode on Charles Oakley. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out this one on the player he was traded for on draft night, or this one on another one of his iconic Knicks teammates. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.